morning, ma'am.
Morning.
Could you please start by stating your full name and introducing yourself to the jury?
My first name is spelled C-A-R-R-E-N. It's Karen. My middle name is now C-O-R-C-O-R-A-N, Corcoran. And my last name is G-U-M-M-I-N, Gummin.
And ma'am, has your name recently changed?
Yes, I got married this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Is that where Gummin comes from?
Yes.
And did you previously go by Karen Corcoran?
Yes.
What is your occupation, ma'am?
I'm retired. I was a police officer with the City of Madison Police Department in Wisconsin for 29 years and 10 months.
When did you retire?
March of last year.
Okay. And do you still work in other capacities?
Yes. I still work human remains detection dogs and do training of trailing dogs and cadaver dogs.
Do you have a company that you work with?
Yes. I have a company that I founded in 2005, Canine Search Solutions.
And what does Canine Search Solutions do?
Originally, I started it to develop a loose network of predominantly cadaver dogs to assist law enforcement in searching for missing people. Over the years, it's evolved into the cadaver dog work and training of dogs.
So do you train dogs yourself that you handle?
Yes.
Do you help others learn how to train dogs?
Yes.
And do you give trainings for other handlers?
Yes.
Let me back up to something that you started with. You said you were a police officer for nearly 30 years in
Yes.
Madison, Wisconsin?
Yes.
Can you walk the jury through your work experience a little bit as a police officer?
I started as a patrol officer in 1990, fresh out of college. I worked in uniform in patrol for about 9 years and then went into special operations. I did community policing for about 6 years, where I worked in what would be considered a challenged neighborhood and did everything from arrest to proactive work. And I worked in uniform operations of a drug unit. I worked undercover as a prostitute in that unit. I then worked in community police teams and for different parts of the city, and it would be anywhere from plainclothes positions, observing open-air drug activities to events with children, just what the needs of the district were. And then in the last 10 years of my career, I put in and was selected to be a dual-purpose patrol dog handler. What that meant was I was full-time canine. Our department had 7 patrol dogs, and I worked different shifts and would just respond to calls as needed for patrol dog work. Anything from sniffing a car for narcotics to specific trailing of a missing person to evidence searches. The dog that I worked, and 7 of our dogs did this, was considered a multi-purpose, your bread and butter police dog. So the dog would do, in a given day, I might go on 3 traffic stops and do narcotic sniffs, and then I might be on the perimeter of arresting somebody on the back in the event they ran. The dog was an apprehension dog also. And we deployed about 200 times a year. So I kept busy for those 10 years doing that.
Can we I want to ask you a couple more basic questions in case anyone doesn't understand the background. So what does it mean to handle a canine unit?
To handle a patrol dog, and I will speak about it from my department, everywhere in the United States is probably a little bit different. The City of Madison, we have 7 patrol dogs and 1 explosives dog. And you apply for the position and go through a pretty extensive interview process. You put a letter of intent in, provide all of your experience. So I was selected for that in 2009, and went to dog school in the Carolinas for a month and was matched up with my patrol dog, Canine Slim. And after that, I came back to Madison and trained under my sergeant of the canine unit, who was a master trainer for about 3 weeks, just to get that dog up and running to go out on the street. And then mandatorily, we do a yearly national certification with the dog in all of the aspects. We train 2 training days a month where we're pulled off the street to just do our dog training. And then throughout our work days, the expectation was that we would do training when we had downtime.
So the certification, is that required of any dog that's deployed in your police department?
Our policy was that we would conduct national certification. So in our part of the country, in Wisconsin, every police department has kind of different options on what they want to do, from certifying under the vendor that they got their dog from, through to what we did was a national certification, which is North American Police Working Dog. And that's predominantly in our part of the country. And so folks that have been doing dogs for a lot of years training put in hours to become certifying officials, and then they run you through those certifications. And they're often people from other states. So every year someone would come in and test our team, the dog and the handler, and then we would become certified as a team, meaning another patrol dog handler could not work my dog on the street. They could, but certification-wise, it was me and Canine Slim.
Why is that?
I think a lot of it is just, that's the way it's always been done. Certainly the dogs will work for different people, but because of the nature of the work that we do, you kind of need to have a pretty intimate bond and connection with that dog in order to know what that dog needs from, some dogs might need to be really held to a high standard of, you're going to listen when I told you, and some you can be a little looser with, depending upon their personalities, that sort of thing.
Is it fair to say it's more accurate and you can work the dog better if you're part of that certified team?
Yes.
And when you're talking about the work in the field as a police officer, you talked about some of those different disciplines that the dog was trained in?
The disciplines that are multi-purpose patrol dogs, and you commonly see that, is the dogs were all certified in narcotics detection, apprehension, which is light work, where the dog catches a bad guy with his teeth. We did scent-specific trailing, which is sort of like what you see in the movies or TV with bloodhounds. You take someone's specific scent and follow them. We did building searches for the safety of the officers to try to locate suspects. We worked on the SWAT team, so we were a tool for the SWAT team. Predominantly, we did perimeter type of security. We did evidence search and area search for people if they're hiding out.
And so the national agencies that do the certification, they would certify the dogs in the different areas, even though they were used for more than one purpose?
Yes.
And the work that the dogs did, is that then the work that was used to build cases by the police in criminal cases?
Yes.
Now, before you applied for that unit, did you have a handling background with canines as well?
Yes.
Talk the jury through that a little bit.
Okay. Well, my backstory is, prior to becoming a police officer, I got a pet German Shepherd, and she was afraid of everything. And the vet said, you better get her into an obedience class. So I was all of 21 and started training the dog, and was just blown away by how much it fed my soul, how they could learn. From there, in 1993, I had been a police officer for 3 years. I floated around watching the narcotics dogs and the trailing dogs whenever I could go to training just to watch. I ended up getting a German Shepherd named Norris, and he was a puppy. My dad actually had his grandfather as a rescue dog, as an older dog, so I knew the bloodlines. And I wanted to go out and search for missing people. I had read a book called So That Others May Live. It was about a woman who did disaster work with dogs. And so my first dog I trained up by just tapping into a lot of people and going to seminars around the Midwest and down south, nothing really west U.S.
Let me stop you there for a second. When you say seminars, are these handling seminars?
Yes. Often they were search and rescue seminars taught by folks who were in the field, anywhere from disaster dogs to cadaver dogs. My first dog was what I would call a dual-purpose search and rescue dog. He looked for missing persons, whether they were alive or dead. So the dog would just simply be sent out into the woods if maybe you had an Alzheimer's patient missing. And when the dog came upon the missing person, whether they were deceased or alive, the dog would come back and give me indication of a bark, and then I'd say, show me, and they'd take me back into it.
Okay. And then moving forward, Norse was your first dog in the early 90s?
Yes.
And after Norse, did you continue to learn how to handle and train other dogs as well?
Yes.
Can you talk about that, please?
My second search dog, so to speak, his name was Cleo. And Cleo was a German Shepherd that needed a job. She had been in rescue. I knew Slim was getting older, and I wanted to continue the volunteer work. Everything I was doing was volunteer. I went and evaluated her for her drives for what I was going to do at that point was just cadaver work. In our part of the country, we don't have as large tracts of land as, let's say, out here in the mountains where people might go hiking and get lost. And it became pretty clear pretty quickly that cadaver dog work or human remains detection work was what I wanted to assist in investigating and or searching for missing deceased persons. So I got Cleo, continued to go to seminars by trainers, come home, work hard. In 2 years, I went to seven seminars from Michigan to Mississippi, all volunteer, and did it on my vacation time while still being a police officer. And Cleo, at that point, when I started training her, it was kind of the in vogue thing to have the dog find small amounts of human remains, maybe a drop of blood, a tooth, something of that nature. And so I ended up doing a lot more missing persons, but then I started to get pulled into criminal work as a result of my being a police officer and working in cadaver dogs.
So when you talk about seminars, you talked about going to 7 in a year. Can you just talk about what that training looks like how much of it you were doing over these early years?
In the early years, whenever, I probably every 3 to 4 months would follow a group of trainers at that time that were training a lot of search and rescue dogs all over the United States. And so when something was going to be close to my area, I would sign up and drive there, stay overnight. It was usually 2 to 3 days long. And you would work with, whether it was Area Search Live, you would work with a trainer and an experienced handler who had been in the field doing the work. And you would spend that time, whether you were training that dog in indication or getting exposed to odors, that sort of thing.
So as you started to learn how to train dogs, did you eventually start to work them in the field in law enforcement operations?
Yes, I had started assisting predominantly in Wisconsin with Norse.
And then as you were doing this, did you start to certify your canines as well?
Yes. In the early days, we did more in-house certifications with a group of handlers that we were a part of a nonprofit. And then I think my first time I did a certification outside of that internal group was 2007 with Cleo for International Police Working Dog. So someone unconnected or had ever trained with me evaluated her to see if she knew her odor and could indicate to it. And
Cleo, you said, was a cadaver dog only?
Yes.
In that certification process, what is that agency? You said the name of it.
That certification that year was IPWADA, International Police Working Dog Association. It's one of, there's multiple national organizations. Some are more predominantly law enforcement, and some are more predominantly search and rescue. So there's quite a few different organizations a handler can go to and attempt to certify under their standards.
And are the standards in the national organizations roughly similar in what they expect from dogs?
You know, every organization has sort of a different approach to it, but in my experience, it's been with 3 different national organizations that I've tested under with both patrol and cadaver dogs. It's usually odor recognition. Does the dog know the odor it's trained to detect? And does it give a trained final response of a spit or a bark? Or can the team locate an aid of human remains? And is it applicable to what you would see in the search field?
And so this national, is it national or international organization that certified CLEO in 2007?
I believe the very first one was IPLADA, International Police Working Dog Association.
Okay. Were you, in fact, able to certify CLEO in human remains detection?
Yes.
And is human remains detection and cadaver sort of a term of art?
So terminology-wise is the dogs that we're speaking about are human remains detection dogs, or HRD dogs. Another kind of like casual term that we use is I have and train and work a cadaver dog.
Okay. And I want to talk a little more specifically about what they do, but first let me walk through a couple other things. So in the course of learning about this, do you also read literature out in the field?
Yes.
And is that peer-reviewed scientific literature on canines?
Yes, through a variety of different sources. I have been doing this a long time, so I feel like I don't know what I'm doing because I've been doing it so long. And I have a couple of mentors that often touch base with me and will share information. And I do seek out more of the scientific portion of dog training, how it may relate to my cadaver dog work.
Then also in learning how to handle dogs, did you eventually become someone who taught others?
Yes. So fast forward, I was on my 3rd cadaver dog, and I was certifying under a national organization called NNDDA, which is National Narcotic Detector Dog Association. That was founded in the 70s, predominantly in the Southwest Texas area, and it was initially a group of police officers who ran narcotics dogs. It has long since expanded into a national organization of predominantly police officers and police trainers who certified the dogs in anything from explosive works to kind of like what Slim, my patrol dog, did, narcotics, to human remains detection.
So you had tested your dogs starting in 2007 with independent agencies that would certify them?
Yes.
And prior to that, you were doing the internal certification?
Yes.
But starting from 2007 on, are these some of these agencies you've talked about, NAPDWA, NNDVA, and then the international one that you spoke about, CLEO?
Yes, they're all national organizations that you become a member of, and then you can choose to attempt a certification with them or just be a member. Depending upon NNDDA, I started certifying with them in 2008 with the 3rd cadaver dog I worked. And in 2016, what I would call mentor, Renee Utley, a master trainer, and she encouraged me to consider putting in to become a national certifying official in the realm of cadaver, because the Wisconsin area didn't have that option available to it. So I went, I first had to submit a resume of my experience, and then if I was accepted by the board of NNDDA, which is a large group of people, I was invited to come down to the nationals in Texas that year and sit amongst them and answer a lot of hard questions. And then they basically take a vote and determine that, yes, I was, in their opinion, qualified to become a certifying official, specifically in the area of cadaver. for NNDDA.
Okay, so you talked about your third dog in 2008 as well. Was that a single-purpose dog as well?
Yeah. My third dog, as Cleo started to age, I saw the writing on the wall, started to look for a new dog, and again, was contacted by a network of people who saw this little German Shepherd who was registered as Canine Molly. I may slip and call her Biddy. That was my name for her, but I'll try and call her Molly. I went and evaluated her when she was about 9 months old. She had been bought by a couple who had her about 9 months and decided they didn't have time for her. And she was put into an all-breed rescue in the Green Bay, Wisconsin area. A volunteer shepherd group asked me to go evaluate her, see if maybe she had the drive for having a job. I went and evaluated her and at about 9 months and said, yep, I'm seeing some really good natural drives. So I actually took her. I had a different dog that I was starting to train up, and Molly, started to show so much potential that I ended up adopting out that other dog and kept her as my third cadaver dog.
Okay. And is Molly the dog we're going to tell the jury did the work in this case ultimately?
Yes.
So let me walk through a couple other things first. So you said from 2007 to 2016 you were certifying dogs in human remains detection.
As a dog handler.
Right.
Yes.
Is that annual, or how frequently were you doing that?
It's recommended, at least in my world, that we should do a check-in and do a national evaluation to the best of your ability every year.
So is it fair to say that from 2007 to 2016 you were certifying dogs roughly annually?
Yes, and then in 2010, I had to also do certifications with my patrol dog.
Okay, and that was Slim?
Yes.
And so Slim was certifying in other disciplines?
Yes, but I had 2 working dogs in different disciplines that I had to test.
Okay, and then in 2016, you had said you went down and tested to be a certifier.
Yes.
Were you, in fact, successful in that process?
Yes. So they deemed that I would become a national certifying official in cadaver only for NNDDA. And so there's a lot of different organizations out there. NNDDA is only open to full-time law enforcement, or if you're in good standing, having worked a dog as a police officer and now retired like myself, I'm able to still be a member and certify full-time firefighter, working a cadaver dog, or full-time, or someone in the military that has an actual position working a cadaver dog. And then the final group that could be eligible for this certification is if you were a civilian and you worked for a private security company, specifically with your cadaver dog, or a private investigator. So there's a very limited group that can test under that certification. But I probably do I think I've to date done 25 dogs since 2016.
Done them meaning?
Certifying them, testing them in cadaver certification, and then passing them.
Do you do that with a team of people?
I do it myself, set up the testing, and then run the dogs teams through it.
And so you talked about these different categories of people that can go to NNDDA. Are these typically people who are going to be gathering evidence, for example, or putting a dog out in the field, working in an official capacity?
You know, I talked about my business, Canine Search Solutions. It is a large network of law enforcement officers who volunteer their time like myself and work their cadaver dogs for law enforcement. Most police agencies are never going to have a full-time cadaver dog on their payroll because they don't know when they'll need them. So that's why you don't see a lot of them. And they're police officers, and I may have a couple of civilians that are able to qualify to take that certification. The dog teams that I work with range from Wisconsin. I have police officers in North Dakota, South Dakota. I think, I've got one in Nevada.
So Canine Search Solutions, you assist handlers in training their dogs up and in learning how to handle canines.
Yes.
And then separately in NNDDA, where you're a member, you then work to certify dogs that are going to work out in an official capacity.
Yes.
So we started in 1993 all the way up till now. How many seminars and trainings and things like that have gone into it over the years?
Can you be more specific? You mean like that I've attended as a student or that I've trained other people?
So you've done some as a student?
Yes.
Hundreds?
Seminars in cadaver or all dog training?
All disciplines.
Boy, I'd have to guesstimate 30, 40
Okay.
seminars.
These are like the weekend type seminars?
They would be anything from the weekend ones to the patrol dog, like going to a seminar to learn how to work your dog with the SWAT team, that sort of thing. But majority of them were cadaver dog training.
And then have you taught at seminars as well, you mentioned?
Yeah, I actually am a member of my other task or skill set is working dogs in scent-specific trailing, the odor that you as an individual leave behind and utilizing a dog to follow that person's odor. I have been doing that with my patrol dog and became a member of the International National Bloodhound Training Institute. And so I am an instructor. I predominantly do law enforcement. I think to date I've done 250 dog teams, mostly in Wisconsin, that area. I forgot your question.
Sure. Well, just that you've done the trainings, you've given the trainings to others at this point?
Yes. And then for cadaver dogs, my philosophy for me personally is the area that I feel is most important is being available with a dog to assist. So I'm kind of selective and only from a place of I can only do so much of training civilians, search and rescue people. I mentor mostly law enforcement working cadaver dogs. Okay.
And then how many searches for human remains have you personally participated in as a handler?
In the cadaver dog realm, about 270 cases since about 1999.
Okay. Are those all in Wisconsin or various places?
No, I have, over the years, through a network of people, done searches in Canada, Wisconsin, North Dakota, South Dakota, Illinois, Iowa, Michigan, North Carolina, South Carolina, trying to think, Kentucky, New Mexico, Colorado.
So if people need an assist with their agency and they don't have a certified human remains detection canine, that's something that over the years you've gone different places to help with those searches?
Yeah. Usually if I get a call from an agency, I'll try to help them locate a team closer. And then every once in a while, depending upon just like, mind you, I've been doing all of this on my vacation and time off. But as the years went on, the department did put us on the clock to do cadaver training and assist. But generally, if I had to travel out of state, I had to take my own time. So I would take on cases as I was available and able to help, and if I thought I could bring something to assist.
And what are the examples of the types of cases you've assisted on in those 270, just to give the jury the general idea of what you're searching for?
So I've done everything from your traditional drowning for the dogs to assist in locating where the human remains are. I've done plane crashes. We have a lot of burned situations, explosions I've worked, hoarder situations where the house is full of stuff and they want to know if there's human remains in it or not. Alzheimer's patient missing, and I do get involved in, because of the nature of being a police officer, a lot of suspicious missing people cases.
So have you assisted in suspected homicide cases before?
Yes.
And have you done both fresh crime scenes and then cold cases years later?
Some, yes.
What does that work typically look like?
You know, based on what I started to recognize in my world was the human remains detection dogs can be utilized when somebody's missing to just figure out where they're at. It's information, and information is also eliminating areas. So, for example, if our police department had a woman, and I've had this situation, who was involved in a domestic situation where it was violent, and she went missing or reported missing, we would utilize the cadaver dogs or a dog to run through the house just to see if there's a large source of human remains odor. Oftentimes, the dogs would not indicate anything. That's good information to figure out, and the person may be found alive later. It's more about capturing any information we can use to locate the missing person.
Okay. And then finally, have you been an expert witness before and qualified in court of law?
Yes.
And has that been specific to human remains detection?
Yes.
How many times?
I have been deemed reliable and or expert. Everybody kind of has a different term. I think 8 times, and one time I was found reliable, but the dog evidence wasn't allowed in, and one time...
Pardon me, Your Honor, if I may, I'm going to object to the characterization there of reliability. The expert qualification is different than that, and that's an issue that should be resolved by the jury. So I object to that characterization by the witness, and she's looking at me because she's anticipating my objection to her qualification as an expert. So since I think they're getting there, I'll put that out there. There's been pleadings filed with our objections, so I would renew those and object to her qualification here, and the characterization of the evidence as reliable.
In terms of the reliability, that was what she was saying. Other jurisdictions use, instead of designating her as an expert, so I don't think that's a problem. The jury will determine how reliable this evidence is. It's entirely up to you what weight to give this evidence, if any. In terms of her expertise, I'll let you go into it some more, but when you're done, I'm going to qualify her as an expert based on everything we've done before in this case.
Understood, Judge.
And what's happened today.
And so, Ms. Gummin, you had said you have testified and been qualified as an expert 8 different times in the court of law.
Yes.
And then, is that just in Wisconsin or in different states?
Predominantly in Wisconsin. I did assist in one case in Illinois, and then the involvement I've had here.
Okay. So, Your Honor, at this time, just in reference, Ms. Gummin, I'm going to move to qualify her as an expert in human remains detection handling.
Didn't hear the end of it.
Human remains detection handling.
Okay. She'll be qualified in that field, noting the previous objections of the defense, so she's qualified.
Thank you, Your Honor. And now I'd like to talk specifically about Molly. So Molly is, you had testified, I think, the 3rd canine that you certified in human remains detection?
Yes.
And have you certified dogs since then in human remains detection?
Yes. Molly's passed away, and I have a 4th cadaver dog that I'm still working in the field.
Okay. Is it, in your experience...
Excuse me, pardon me. I'm going to object to the continued reference to these animals as cadaver dogs. They're human remains detection dogs. Cadaver is misleading, so under 403, we object.
Okay. I think the jury has been informed as to that's the generic term for human remains. It's used somewhat interchangeably, probably not as precise as could be, but I think you understand what's going on, so I'm going to overrule the objection. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. So in training human remains detection canines, is it fair to say some dogs are better than others in your experience?
Yes.
Can you explain that a little bit?
I I think that there's a lot involved in the training and the handling of a human remains detection dog. You know, you want to find a breed that is suitable. Molly was a German Shepherd, which traditionally we found that they're good detection dogs based their olfactory ability and they're wanting to work with a person. I think that it's important that the dog and handler have regular training and that the dog is provided the opportunity to learn the odor of human remains.
So let me stop you because I want to go through some of these things very specifically. And you started to say some of the reasons that Molly was reliable, but in your experience level dealing with a lot of dogs, was Molly a canine that you found to be good at what she did?
Yes.
And you started to talk about the breed and the training, and I want to go through each of those things one at a time. Your Honor, at this time, may I approach people's 469, 467, and 468?
Yes, you may.
I've got 469.
So, Ms. Gummin, have you seen those three exhibits before?
Yes.
What is 469?
A picture of Molly.
Okay.
We have some Kleenex there somewhere, if you look.
How long did you work, Molly?
10 years. Sorry.
And she's since passed away?
Yeah, yeah,
Is that a close working relationship that you had?
yeah. Yes.
Is 469 a fair and accurate picture of what Molly looked like when she was a working dog?
Yes.
And you said she's a German Shepherd?
Yes.
And that's a breed that is commonly used for this type of work?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I'd move to admit people's 469 in the evidence, please.
Mr. Moran?
401. Objection.
Okay, overruled.
May I publish, Your Honor?
You may. It's admitted.
I think we need the cord. So is this a picture of Molly in her working days?
Yes.
Okay. And you started to talk a little bit about the breeds and the sensitivities of their nose. Can you just give the jury a little background on how sensitive a dog's nose is as compared to a human's nose?
There's a lot of research out there. I think maybe an easy way to think about it is science done by Kenneth Burton out of Auburn University says that a dog can detect down to 1 point per trillion. Or maybe an easier way for the lay person to understand it is...
Objection, Your Honor. And having to put it in a way that lay people will understand demonstrates the point here that this is expert testimony, that she has not been qualified to provide the jury. Objection.
Response?
So she's been qualified in human remains detection. I can expand the request for that if that's not all encompassing, but we had a hearing on this, Judge, and we have the court's ruling. And I'm going to have her explain to the jury some of the principles behind dog handling. She talked about since 1993 doing this work. She's certified multiple dogs. She's certified other dogs. She runs a company. She's been a sworn police officer working on duty, collecting evidence with these dogs. She's up on the literature. She's testified as an expert witness numerous times, and she's citing a study that she's read. Now, the idea that she's not an expert is, at this point, the court's ruled on it. And so I would ask that she be able to explain some of these principles to the jury.
I think, go ahead.
The qualification requested by the prosecution was human remains detection handling. So what we're talking about here is something that would require a zoologist or somebody with expertise in olfactory. Would require the expertise of a zoologist, someone experienced in the science of animal sensing in the olfactory systems of animals. So beyond what this court has identified, Ms. Corcoran-Gunning, congratulations, more than this court identified this expert as qualified to provide. What we've litigated and what I believe Your Honor's ruled is that this witness can discuss human remains detection, dog handling, and that the rest of it, scientific information, is something a different witness would be necessary for.
Well, she's also testified that she gives training, she certifies. That would require certainly to have this knowledge in terms of what the underlying principles are, but I don't think your qualification that you requested quite does that. You want to request that she is also qualified in terms of the underlying principles, in terms of training other people and certifying dogs on a national basis.
Yes, Your Honor, I do.
She'll be so qualified, so she can answer the question.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I do agree, we can't go too deep into this because it does tend to get outside of her expertise, but in terms of how much they can detect and what they detect, I think that would be part of what she would know as part of her expertise.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Ms. Gummin, generally speaking, can dogs smell things that humans can't?
Yes,
Do they have much more sensitive noses than humans?
yes.
And you were starting to explain from the literature just the degree to which they can smell what we can't, right?
Yes.
Can you finish that answer for the jury, please?
A layperson's mindset would be maybe like a quarter teaspoon of sugar in an Olympic-sized pool a dog could locate, something of that nature.
Is it fair to say that they have many, many more olfactors in their nose and millions of times better scent at least?
Yes, much better than a human.
So has it ever been possible for humans to create instruments that can even reproduce what a dog does with its nose?
Currently, well, let's break this down.
Well, let's keep let's actually, I want to ask you a simple question. Has anyone ever be able to create an instrument, for example, that's as sensitive as a dog's nose?
Not to date.
And so dogs do a very specific thing. They smell things that we can't. With proper training, then they can report back, and that's pretty much the extent of the science behind it.
Yes.
Now, you talked about a breed like Biddy. Is it recognized throughout the field in a lot of the dogs that you certify, for example, or dogs you previously used, that German Shepherds are very good at this type of work?
Yes.
Now I want to talk to you about the training itself. With regard to Biddy, can you walk the jury through how you would take Biddy from when you received her when she was very little, and how do you train her up to be a working dog in human remains detection?
So how I currently and how Molly was trained up is, first you have to train with human remains. Unfortunately, that's the graphic part. And you basically need to make the dog realize that that's of value, that odor. And that odor is very different than every other odor out there. So as a young pup, Molly was, I'll start with Molly. She was about 9 months old. So I took a couple of weeks just to begin to bond with her, establish a toy she liked to play with. That's the methodology I like to work with. Her toy would kind of like be our paycheck, and work some obedience with her, just basically bond with her. I then would also always be working on environmentals for the dog, meaning because of the nature of the work, we're often in very unique situations. So the more confident that dog is and the more life experience it's had, the more successful it will be just simply working in the field. Then what I do is start the dog identifying their favorite toy, and the first 30 days-ish, I would simply take the dog to different locations with human remains, place the human remains in high grass, rubble, that sort of thing, and simply hold on to the dog and toss her toy visually in front of her, almost like horseshoes throw, towards the human remains. So then I just let the dog go find, and she ranges out away from me and gets her toy. So she's inadvertently being imprinted with something of value with that odor. And I would do 1, 2, put the dog up, move the aids, 1, 2, and that's day 1 of training. I'm constantly varying up those odors from bone to as fresh a decomposition as I have, and I'm going to different places. I try to do that when I'm first training a dog every 3 to 4 days so they can maintain their momentum. Once the dog is ranging out and getting paid basically around its odor, and I'm away from it, then the next phase would be, or the next 30-ish days would be, aids are out in the high grass, and now I have the toys, and they're with the aids, and I would stand back in the same position of holding the dog and sending her with that hand motion, but there's no visual clue, or the toy isn't sailing through the air, cluing the dog, but the dog still sees everything else, and she would then range out and self-reward at the odor. Again, I'm back from her. That's why I like this methodology, because a lot of our work needs to be off lead, away from us. Once she's ranging out and again self-rewarding at odor, just her, and doing that same methodology of every 2 to 3 days, 1, 2, put her up, 1, 2. That space of putting them up in the car actually helps them learn odor better, gives them a little time to process it. The final 30 days, and this is just basic cadaver training, I would identify what do I want for a trained final response. Do I want a sit, a bark, a down, and her indication was a sit. So I would be teaching her that as an obedience lesson just around the yard, maybe from a distance of from me to 10 feet away. And then I would go back out in the field, and her last 30 days, I'm training her to say, this is the odor I know, and I'm giving you my trained final response of a sit. So I would, again, set up the same picture, because dogs are very contextual, have the aids in the high grass so it's not visual, and get her downwind, and I would give her that hand motion of go find, or sook, or whatever my command's going to be, and she would range out, catch odor, look around for a toy, it's not there. She would look at me, and that's when I would tell her, sit, and she would sit, and then she gets her toy, paying her at source. So that is the fundamental beginnings of basically teaching a dog the odor of human remains and the trained final response. But from there, there's a whole bunch of training in terms of taking it beyond there.
Okay. So in that fundamental stage, you're teaching the dog what the odor is and how to do a trained final response.
Yes.
Is that typical within the field to do that process early on?
You know, there are many ways to train detection dogs. That's the methodology that I like to use, just based off of the kind of work that I've run into in the field. Some people use a clicker method or food at source. They have walls where a ball will pop out when the dog gets to odor. So there's varied ways of doing that.
Okay. And others in the field do it similarly to the way that you do it?
Most of the teams that train with me have gotten to where we're all consistently doing that, but not all of them. Some of them do it a little different.
Okay. Then after that fundamental stage, does it become a more of a formalized training regimen?
Yes. You're starting out doing what I call baby searches, where...
Let me stop you first, because I wanted to circle back on something. You talked about human remains, and I think you testified you only use actual human remains in your training. Is that correct?
Correct.
Why is that?
I think based off of all the research that's out there, the chemical makeup of a deceased human is very different at different ports during the decom process than a pig or a deer, and I just would want to use what it is that they're supposed to find as the correct odor.
So that odor that's unique to a human remains, that's a signature that they're looking for out in the field?
Yes.
So it's more accurate if you're using the actual human remains?
Yes, versus pseudo or other stuff.
Do you eventually move into training that involves blind testing and things like that?
Yes. So once that dog and that handler, that team is starting to work together, we'll do maybe what I call blind problems or unknown. So if I'm the trainer, I would come into this room and place one find and say to my new green team, you have one find in this room, put your dog to work. And then they would come in and search, and hopefully they locate it and give their trained final response. In the early days, the training, you'll see where the dog is confident on some odors. They'll tell you about, or they'll give you a trained final response. And some odors, maybe they're not confident on it yet. So maybe that blind problem didn't pan out well for the team, but it's good information for the handler to know, what do I need to work on? And then the other parts of the blind training is, in the real world, we don't know. And number one, I need to know when my dog is in odor and not in odor of human remains. But I also need to learn to read what I would call their tells. Every dog has certain secondary behaviors or change of behavior, different terms in the field, when they come into the odor of what they're paid to tell you about by their trained final response. Some dogs might be moving forward very quickly and do a 90-degree turn and slow their movement, drop their nose, their face looks different, a tail may wag, and that's really what handlers need to really learn to pay attention to. The trained final response is really the icing on the cake.
Your Honor, at this point, I'm going to object to any further testimony being provided about things that are not the icing on the cake. This court's ruling, when this was litigated previously, was with respect to final trained responses, and that the final trained responses would be what was admissible here. And we're now well beyond that and discussing other things that I understand handlers rely on, but Your Honor's previous ruling on this issue was more narrow. And
I don't remember limiting it to that.
That's
I mean, I know I
inaccurate.
talked about it in that order, but I wouldn't have limited it to that, and I'll take a look over the lunch hour, but pretty sure I didn't do that. In terms of my order, because at the previous hearings, the various hearings we had, not just this witness, there was testimony concerning indications, which is what she's talking about right now, and I think that is admissible. It's not a trained final response. The jury can give whatever weight that is once we get to the actual evidence of this case, but you're overruled.
just the last thing to tie that up is that certification necessitates final trained responses, and Your Honor allowed in this sort of evidence when certification was available. Certification, as I understand it, I know Ms. Corcoran-Gunning will correct us if I'm wrong, but certification is not available for signals or for some of the other things that are referred to as the art of dog handling rather than the science. So
I understand that.
Okay.
So, and that doesn't affect my ruling. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Ms. Gummin, you were talking about just learning the dog's overall behavior, right?
Yes.
And in the field, what you're looking for, what you've trained the dog for, is a trained final response, but there are other indications that are helpful to know what the dog's doing.
Yes.
So you had talked about the types of testing. Is it something you'd characterize as setting up a problem for the dog that has areas where the dog needs to find, locate, indicate, and that's the kind of trainings that you do?
Yes. Training should involve a variety of things to really introduce that dog to it. There's proofing, which would be, we use rubber gloves to handle human remains, so we need to set that out to make sure the dog hasn't inadvertently learned human remains odor plus rubber gloves. And that's something you want to check in on. Or it may be, I need you to go work 2 acres and just give your dog their command and tell me if you think something's in there or not of human remains. And so it just really varies on where that dog is in training and what that handler has done so far.
Okay. And so with Molly, did you do all these kinds of training?
I tried to do it to the best of my ability.
And then do you keep training records when you do these trainings?
We have to keep training logs of any dog that works.
Okay. And your training logs are a sheet of paper that document the problem and the successes or lack thereof of the dog on that particular training?
Yes.
And do you vary the sorts of problems and trainings that you do at the various times that you're doing the training with the dog?
Yes.
So what, you talked about proofing. Do you ever use certain false positives to rule them out, such as, let's use an example like animal remains?
Yes. You need to put in, you know, on a regular basis, we're out in the woods or wherever, and there's going to be other deceased things out there, but they're not human remains odor. So we purposely maybe identify, oh, there's a dead raccoon, put remains, human remains beyond it, put that dog to work, giving their command to search for the odor of human remains. And as the dog is passing through that area of where the animal is, when they're young, they may show interest, they may indicate. Those are all really important things you need to know in order to know what's your next training exercise. And then as you're going into the field, you really need to know, is the dog going to check it out and move on? But in the end, they then get to human. They give you your trained final response, and they get their paycheck. So that becomes even more high value than any of the animals.
So is that another example of proofing them off of something, animal remains?
Yes.
What things was Molly proofed off of prior to you bringing her in for a certification?
Lots of different animal remains. I'm not quite sure how to answer that.
Sure. Well, what are some of the problems that I think you already talked about animal remains, you talked about gloves. Are there other things that you want to make sure the dog's not going to falsely indicate on?
Yeah, you would pick their favorite toys and set those out to make sure the dog isn't hitting on their favorite toy. Food, or bag of dog food, or anything that you can possibly think of that you may see in the real search world. You want to set that dog up simply to know where your dog is at with their capabilities of what they're going to give you a trained final response on or not.
What about like human waste, for example? Like if you're out on a search with a bunch of people from search and rescue and they urinate in the woods, is that something that's going to falsely alert a dog?
Urine is not something that, so urine, feces, semen, all three of the, or menstrual blood, you know, human blood is blood. I would always say that I could not say with 100% certainty that Molly was proofed off of menstrual blood. However, I had trained her to not indicate on it, and I had seen her in the field bypass it. Urine and feces has just never really been an issue because we're constantly out in the field, and somebody goes off into the weeds and goes to the bathroom. And then the other thing that I would do is run them past whenever there were bathrooms or outhouses. Definitely put that in the search problem for training. Again, so I could catalog where was this dog at with her knowledge base of when she gives a trained final response and when she doesn't.
So by the time you're bringing a dog in for certification, is it fair to say you've done a lot of training problems?
Yes.
Those are all documented in sheets of paper that have that information?
Yes.
And you keep those records and document those hours?
Yes.
How frequently were you training Molly in terms of just hours?
You know, when I first started, I tried to train them every 3 to 4 days when they're first training up. It's a balancing act for me because I always had one dog up and running and one starting. So I tried to get 12, 15 hours of just time with that dog a month. You know, training definitions are different. I get just as much training out of following another team, working their dog on a problem, and observing their dog as I do working my own.
So you did a combination of being out with dog teams and putting Molly out in situations and also formalized training that you would document in training records.
Asked and answered.
It's okay. You can answer that question.
Yes.
Thank you. And then, did that enable you to create a chart that can assist the jury just in documenting successes in those training sessions?
I developed the ability, I took every time that she did an unknown problem, a single blind problem, where someone hides something, and also incorporated her certifications through the years, and those would be considered blind also, and did to the best of my ability through her training logs and certification, a catalog of how many aids, how many fines, how many misses, and how many false alerts.
Yeah. And that creates sort of a reliability chart.
Yes.
Have you seen people's 467?
Yes.
Is that same chart?
Yes.
And is that a fair and accurate summary of the voluminous training records that you were referring to?
To the best of my ability, yes.
And then it references the certifications as well?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, I move to admit people's 467 into evidence, please.
Mr. Moran?
Commissioner Bordier.
Go ahead.
On 467, first of all, good morning. With respect to this chart, people in the prosecution are trying to admit into evidence. You would agree that in creating this chart, you are trying to be accurate.
To the best of my ability, yes.
And accuracy matters for things like reliability charts, right?
Yes.
And you assigned yourself, or yourself and the dog, a percentage of reliability and gave a percentage number so that you could say how reliable this dog is, right?
Based off of this, there was a percentage that came up, yeah.
Right, and you wrote it on this chart, right?
Yes.
And in order to get to that percentage of precision or reliability for this dog, you would agree that the items on this document need to be true, right?
To the best of my ability, yes.
What do you mean by to the best of your ability? Is this reliable or is it not?
Yes.
So your reliability chart reflects really remarkable accuracy. 91% accurate is what you're claiming, right?
Of single blind training, yes.
And as you said on, well, I don't know that you did say this, but you're noting on here that there's only ever been with Biddy or Molly, this dog.
Is this cross-examination or is this voir dire as to whether or not it's...
This is voir dire that a document called the reliability chart should not be provided as an exhibit. It's not.
Then it's an objection. If you want to make the objection, that's fine.
I think that some information has to be demonstrated to the court to consider in determining whether this piece of evidence is admissible. And the fact that it's referred to and titled reliability chart, and with a few more questions, I'll demonstrate that's not true.
All right, go ahead.
And this reliability chart is something that you have provided to the court on a previous occasion, right?
For this case?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
And you updated it, though, at the request of the prosecution. And since you last provided it to the court, there's been an update to it made, right?
Yes.
And when you made that update, you didn't make any change to what's been represented here as the May 1st, 2008 certification, right?
Your Honor, I'm going to have her talk about all the certifications. I have a separate exhibit for it, and she's going to talk about this one too, including the fact that on Molly's first try, she was not certified, and every other one since 2008, she was. So we're going to do all this. This is not voir dire. This is defense counsel doing a cross-examination. I'm still on direct.
That's what it sounded like to me, Mr. Moran. Do you have any further response to that?
Yes, Your Honor. That at a previous hearing, this witness acknowledged that her reliability chart was wrong, and then provided an updated version that didn't correct that error. So here we are again, seeking to admit an item as a piece of evidence in a trial that's inaccurate. This witness knows it, the prosecution knows it, they're still trying to pass it off as a reliability chart with this glaring error and a representation here that on May 1st, 2008, that there was certification, when in fact on May 1st, 2008, there was a failed certification, and there were more false alerts than this witness is acknowledging in her reliability charts, which was pointed out to her on cross-examination in June of 2019, and that error still has not been fixed, and the prosecution is yet again seeking to admit an unreliable, false piece of evidence with the words reliability at the top of it.
Judge, he knows better because she testified.
You're done, okay? It's coming in. This is not voir dire. Do you have any other objection? This is something you can go into a cross-examination. Do you have any other objections?
Just objection to bolstering the evidence that this chart and this handler's talking about that says reliability. I think
Well,
that's
the
not
term
true.
reliability is going to be up to the jury to determine whether this is reliable or not. You can certainly cross-examination based upon anything that you've gotten in discovery, anything that happened at previous hearings, anything that you're aware of. So it's important that the jury, from the prosecution's standpoint, as I do this for the defense, it's important for the prosecution to be able to show that there has been testing of Molly or Biddy, and the jury can take for it what it's worth. That's the whole purpose of cross-examination. This exhibit will be admitted. I forget what number it was.
467, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Officer Corcoran, Ms. Gummin, you did previously testify about reliability, correct?
Yes,
And a chart just like this.
yes,
And in that testimony, in your direct testimony, you talked specifically about Molly's first attempt to certify, right?
she failed.
Right. And we discussed all that despite what counsel's saying now in the direct testimony the last time you testified.
Objection to the form of the question.
Well, had you not made your voir dire as you did, I would agree with you, but I think this is fair game at this point, Mr. Moran.
Okay. So, Ms. Gummin, you were transparent with the court at the time, and we're about to explain all of that to the
However,
jury.
you can't characterize that she was transparent. That is objectionable.
Understood. And we're about to explain all of that same thing to the jury, correct?
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to move to publish 467, Your Honor, at this time.
All right.
So now in terms of 467, did you put in bold the certification dates?
Yes,
And it starts with the one that Mr. Moran just started talking about, right?
yes,
And then as it goes down, and you document the finds, the misses, and then the false alerts in columns there to summarize it for the jury, correct?
yes. This is whenever I was given a single blind test, whether it was training with other handlers or my national certs are in bold.
And the reason the national certs are in bold is because that's not you doing the training, but that's the certifying organization doing the training, right?
Yes.
Objection as to leading.
Try not to lead in the future. That one's okay. Go ahead.
So there's a distinction. The bold is that, well, he just testified to it. So let's talk about as we go down this. It starts in 2008, correct?
Yes,
And then if we scroll down, there's going to be multiple in bold, right?
for each year that I was able to do a certification is in bold.
Okay. When did you testify you first got Molly?
I got her in 2007.
And you started that formalized training with the blind testing by 2008.
The blind testing would have been in 2008, yeah, yes.
And then I'm just going to scroll down to show the jury what the whole document looks like. So it tracks through 2010, tracks through 2000, and here we have 2012, 2013, and then 2014, 2015, and then you've done just a percentage at the bottom, correct?
Yes,
Okay, so this is a summary of those indications, any misses, and any false positives on the training exercises.
that were unknown or blind,
All right.
yes.
So start by telling the jury about how long you worked with Molly and then her first attempt to certify. That's that first bold one on May 1st of 2008, and I'll scroll back up.
The question is, I started training her in 2007. I had Cleo still working, so there was no urgency to getting her certified and out in the field. I went in May of 2008 to North American Police Working Dog Certification in Missouri, and went through attempting to certify Biddy, and she did not pass the certification in May of 2008.
Why not?
I think she was just too green, too immature, and we learned what we needed to work on.
And then did you go back after that? It indicates on there was a false positive and 2 misses, correct?
Yes,
So that's the kind of thing that's going to keep a dog from certifying, right?
yes.
And then you continued to, and there have been a couple misses in training as well. And then you documented moving down some of those other training exercises leading to the next certification process, correct?
Yes.
And that was about how many months later?
4 months later.
So after doing various additional trainings with her, how'd she do in September of 2008?
In 2008, she completed her first certification with a national organization.
And was this you setting up the problem, or was this someone else setting up the problem for Molly to test on?
This was done by Jan Schofield out of Florida. He came to Wisconsin and set it up. So he had never seen me or her before.
Did he independently make a determination about Molly's reliability at that point in terms of certifying?
Based off of her performance at that certification, she passed the standard that was put forth.
Okay. What does that mean?
She correctly located the remains that she was put out to find, and I had no false alerts by her and no misses.
Okay. And then moving down from 2008, did you take Molly in roughly annually to certify as well?
Yes, most all of her certifications were NNDDA, either in Wisconsin or I had to travel down to Texas where a certifying official was. That was the closest at that time. And I did one North American Police Working Dog with her in, I think, 2012, which is the organization I use with my patrol dog.
And so these independent organizations were making that determination on an annual basis with regard to Molly?
That on that given... on that given day, she performed properly and was certified.
Okay. Now, you've noticed you noted in some of your training records that there were misses that Molly had, right?
Yes.
As we scroll down the document, can you talk about whether Molly improved over time in terms of misses?
Yes. Any dog that's first new or green, you're going to find that they're possibly going to miss or fault, but as time goes on, you strive to have a good tool through years of experience and training. So she, and those misses might have been from a handler error. I didn't get her into the area to get it, or I called her away from it, or she just wasn't confident on a particular odor, so she did not give an indication, so there was a miss.
Okay. Did Molly ever fail to certify after that May 1st of 2008?
She certified always after that.
And that was all the way through to the bottom of the chart in 2015?
Yes.
And then, is there a theme with Molly, whether she was more inclined to have a miss or more inclined to have a false alert in all your time working with her?
The quality that I most liked about Molly was she was more likely, if she wasn't certain about something, to walk away and miss it than she was to fall. And that I saw through training and life experience with her. So I could appreciate that.
Are these training agencies, are they using real human remains as well?
Yes, all of it is correct.
Okay. And then in particular, as we're looking up where it is right now, we can see, I think, is it 326 of 2012 and 414 of 2013, right?
Yes.
So at the time that you came to Colorado, was she certified under one of these within that year period?
When she was, the first time we came here, she had completed, 5 national certifications through the years.
Including one in April 14th of 2013?
Yes.
And then again in April of 2014?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I have People's 468 in front of the witness, and Ms. Gummin, is that a fair and accurate packet of those certifications that Molly received through the years?
Yes.
Okay. And despite counsel's question, of course, there's not one in there for May 1st of 2008, right?
She failed
Right.
her first cert.
But you made a packet for the jury of all the ones that were passed that's fair and accurate.
I made a packet of all of her certification attempts.
Thank you. So at this time, Your Honor, I'd move to admit People's Exhibit 468 into evidence.
Mr. Moran, question the board here. Okay. You just testified that the one failed certification was not in here and being provided to the jury as properly completed certifications, right?
Can you re-say that question?
Sure. Your testimony was that the occasion of the failed certification was not being provided to the jury in this pile of paperwork describing successfully completed certification.
Oh, no, it's in there for
Okay.
failed certification.
Right. The testimony was just something different.
Oh,
So you would agree that that failed certification detector dog search test document is included in Exhibit 468?
yes, but the one you're looking for is, North American Police Working Dog. And it's in here somewhere. Do you want me to find it?
Well, it's page 16,746. It's in the packet that's just been provided to you. The testimony was that the failed certification document wasn't provided. It has been provided. So this is not the fair and accurate exhibit that had been described to the jury. On that basis, Your Honor, I would object.
You're overruled if the failed certification, and maybe the question was wrong or she testified wrong. I remember something similar to what you stated, but I don't remember it exactly. But the fact that does it show it being a failed certification?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, then I don't see any problems with it.
I think that's my mistake. I think I misspoke, but you clarified all the attempts are in there, correct?
Yes, this would be this, you want the page
So
for the failed?
just to be hold on. Just to be clear, 468 is admitted. Now, you want to say something, Mr. Frank? Because we were talking over each other and I stopped you.
Yes. I don't understand why it's being admitted, but we have like an emergency bathroom need. So,
you know what, that's probably a good time to break. So, and if you don't understand why I've done something, you can keep it to yourself in the future, please. Because my rulings are my rulings, and we all have to live with them, whether they're right or wrong. So we'll start up again at 1:15. Remember my admonitions, don't talk to anybody about the case, don't do any research on your own. Just remember you have to decide the case based upon what happens in this courtroom and that alone. So with that, everybody right to the jury? Okay, we'll be in recess. We'll start up again at 1:15.